Hi everyone, Nikki here again for week 3. Next. This week we're going to do something a little bit different, but something that I think will touch all of our hearts. It's going to be a unit called Tell Me a Story. Now, from reading your introductions, I know that many of you love stories in books and in films. And I've also read some of your scam stories, which we will share later. Next. All human beings tell stories. That's a fundamental thing we all share. We share stories. We need stories. We have heard stories from each other in the last couple of classes. Some students have shared their stories. I shared my story of the Hi Mum scam. We listened to Georgina's story. When you were a small child, before you could read or watch a movie, you would have heard stories from your parents, from your grandparents, aunties, uncles. You, as a little child, would have told stories. We always want to tell our story. Whether the story is a personal one, like the ones we shared with each other in class, or a fictional one, like in a novel or a short story or a movie, it is a story. Every one of us is a storyteller. Every story, from a simple folk tale to a complicated novel or movie, has the same elements. These elements are in every short story, novel, folk tale, fairy tale, or film. The first one is the plot. That is the sequence of events that make up a story. The plot is how the story develops, unfolds, and moves in time. The plot defines the what, the when, and the where of the story. What happens and what is the cause and effect? When does it happen and where is it happening? Next. Then there's the setting. The setting is the time and place in which a story is told. There are so many stories that you will know from your childhood or from a movie. When we watch a movie, is this story set in India? Is this story set in America? Is it set in the 20th century? Is it set in World War I? Is it set like right now, today? The next thing is the theme. The theme is an important idea that is woven throughout a story. Why has the writer or the filmmaker, or even just us personally, why are we telling that story? A theme links a big idea about our world or our society with the action of the text. Characters. We love characters. We can't have a story without characters. That is a person, a creature, an animal, or any personified being in the story. Sometimes a character could be like a talking lamp or a talking teapot, but it has to be something that is in the story that is driving the story. The next thing is point of view. Point of view refers to who is telling a story. Is the story being told by one of the characters? So they're saying, I did this, I did that. Or are they telling a story about someone else? You did this, you did that, that second person. Or are they telling the story from outside the story? This is what happened. He was doing this. So first person point of view uses the pronouns I and we. Second person point of view uses the pronoun you. Third person point of view uses the pronouns she, he, they, it. So that's the very common one, third person. Conflict. Conflict is essential in every story as it is the driving force of the narrative and builds narrative tension. So the conflict in stories is usually between these are big words I'm going to say now, a protagonist, the main character in the story, and the person that the story is usually written about. That's the protagonist. The writer usually develops the plot around the protagonist. For instance, with some problem that needs solving. So someone is having an issue or a problem. And then there's the antagonist. This is the person that opposes or fights against another character. Often the antagonist is often a villain, a bad guy, or a bad woman. But usually the person that they fight against is the protagonist. I'd like you to think about who is the protagonist in Georgina's story that we heard last week, where the poor woman that was scammed, and who is the antagonist? Who was the person that was fighting or doing something bad against Georgina? Next. Here is a very tiny story that we would have heard told by every child in our lives. If you have children, if you were a child, as you all were, we have all heard this story. So a small child might say, "My friend doesn't want to play with me. She took my toy. I don't like her. She made me cry." Tiny, tiny childhood story. We hear it from every child lots of times. All the elements of storytelling are here. There is a plot. Two children are playing. One child they are having a fight. They are having a quarrel. There is a setting. We're not quite sure where it is, but it could be in a playground. It could be at school. It could be at home. There is a protagonist, the child who's telling the story. And this is in first person point of view. The child is telling the story. Me, my friend, I don't like her. And the antagonist is the friend who is fighting with the child. And the conflict is the fight. The story, all the elements of story are right here. The theme could be something about friendship. There's all of the elements. We are telling story every day of our lives. Every time we open our mouth to talk to someone, we're telling a story. So, next. So I wanted to start with a very simple type of story, a folk tale or a folk story. These are traditional stories that people tell each other out loud. Often they're not written down. Every single human society or culture has its own folk tales, which are handed down through generations. So I remember my grandmother telling me stories, and then I would tell my children the same stories. They go down through the generations. And your cultures, in Dari and in Urdu, have some of the most beautiful, and from India, of course, have some of the most beautiful folk tales in the world. And I would like you to think of some of those little stories that we get told. And often there might be an animal might be the character, or something magical might happen. That's the kind of stuff that goes on in folk tales. So I'm going to now tell you a folktale from Indonesia. This is very similar to the Western story Cinderella, which you might all know. And I'd like you to think, is there a similar story in your culture? The story I'm going to tell is called Bawang Merah and Bawang Putih. It's a story from Indonesia. In a small village, there lived a wealthy merchant and his beautiful wife. They had a daughter named Bawang Putih. For a time, they led blissful lives. However, one day, the wife fell ill and died. After some time, the merchant married again. His second wife was a widow with one child named Bawang Merah. A few years later, the merchant fell ill and died. Bawang Putih was left with her stepmother and stepsister. The stepmother was a harsh, demanding woman. Bawang Merah was a vain, selfish girl. They forced Bawang Putih to do all the work. Bawang Putih grew into a kind, clever girl. Her stepmother and stepsister made her suffer by giving her a lot of chores to do from dawn to dusk. One day, while Bawang Putih was washing clothes in the river, a red scarf that belonged to Bawang Merah floated away in the water. Bawang Putih ran along the river to retrieve the scarf. However, the water flowed too fast. The red scarf was out of her sight. The river ended in a cave. Bawang Putih went inside and found an old woman there. "Hello there, young girl. Who are you and what are you doing here?" "I'm Bawang Putih, madam. I'm looking for my sister's red scarf. Have you seen it?" "Yes, I have. I'm going to give it to you, but you must help me to do some chores first," said the old woman. "Most willingly, madam," answered Bawang Putih. Bawang Putih helped the old woman clean the cave and cook some food. The old woman was pleased by Bawang Putih's work. "Thank you, Bawang Putih. Here's your sister's scarf. Because you've helped me, I will give you a present," said the old woman. She presented 2 boxes, one large and the other small. Bawang Putih was not greedy, so she chose the small box. After thanking the old woman, she went home. "What is that box in your hands? Give it to me. I want to see it," said Bawang Merah. When Bawang Putih opened it, they discovered lots of jewels and gold coins inside. Bawang Putih told them how she got the box. They scolded her because she did not take the large box. "I will take the large box and become richer than you," laughed Bawang Merah. The next day, Bawang Merah purposely dropped her red scarf into the river and went to the old woman's cave. The old woman asked her to help clean the cave, but Bawang Merah refused. She poked around the cave and found the large box. "I'll take this, old woman," cried Bawang Merah, running with the box. When she went home, she and her mother opened the large box. How surprised they were! It was full of snakes. They were bitten by the snakes, but Bawang Putih helped them. Bawang Merah and her mother realized their mistakes. They promised never to torment Bawang Putih anymore. Bawang Putih lived happily ever after. So, for homework and discussion, I want you to, and we'll have a little discussion about this after our lesson as well, but this is the homework I want you to do. I want you to find a folktale from your culture. Your culture would have plenty of these types of stories. And there would be different ones as well. And I want you to try and find one, and please provide a copy of the story. You can send us a link if it's on a website. You can send a little printed copy through the email. You can just write a little Word document copy or whatever. Or if you absolutely think you can't find a copy, which I very much doubt that you don't have a folk tale from your culture that you can use, you could use the story of Bawang Putih and Bawang Merah. You could explain, I want you to explain the elements of the story, the plot. What happens in this story? The theme. What is the purpose of the story? Why did the writer or the teller, the person who made up this story, why did they tell this story? Why did they make this story up? Next. The character. Who are the characters in the story? In the Bawang Putih, Bawang Merah story, it's very easy. There are only 3 characters. And the point of view. who is telling the story. And in this story, Bawang Putih, Bawang Merah, I'll give you a hint, it is being told from outside the story. So it's not a character in the story telling the story. It's the point of view that is from outside the story, saying he and she, telling the story using the pronouns she all the time. Setting. Where and when does the story take place? You can talk about it takes place in a village, it takes place in Indonesia, it's quite a long time ago, that sort of thing. Conflict. What is the conflict in the story? This one has a very clear conflict, that Bawang Putih was a happy child living with her mother and father until the mum died, then her father died, and then she's got the stepmother. Who is the protagonist? In the Bawang Putih story, it's very easy to figure out who is the main character, the person who the whole story is about. Who is the antagonist? Who are the people that are having conflict or fighting or struggling with the protagonist? Now, the next thing I want to do is to talk about the fact that we're going to share our stories in this lesson, in this class, after we watch this video. So, do you have a scam story to share with us today? And I would like people to think about, if they brought their scam story, that they're going to be sharing that today and thinking, in that story, who is a protagonist? What was the plot? What is the theme? What is the point of me telling this story? Where is the setting of the story? Was it in an office? Was it in your own home? Where did this happen? It obviously happened online. So were you at home when you were using computer? What happened? So what is the point of view? You will be telling stories from the first person point of view today, your point of view. This happened to me. I was scammed, or I managed to avoid the scam. But it will be I, me, maybe we. If you're telling a story maybe about your friend, it could be she. All right. So I want to talk a little bit before we start the scam stories about these two questions. Because I've been thinking a little bit about this since we've started these online classes. What could happen if you share your personal information on any online platform, social media, Facebook Messenger, whatever it might be, and that includes on a Zoom chat? This is very important because we are using Zoom chat a lot during our classes. Now, Zoom chat in our classes must only be used for information or conversation about the class. Teacher, couldn't you tell me where I can get my homework? Or maybe another student, thank you for that lovely story, to another student. But what you must not do on a Zoom chat, because it is just dangerous to do this anywhere on the internet, is to share your personal information or your personal individual contact information. Please do not share your addresses, where you live, your phone numbers. Do not share those. Do not share information about your families, whether you have children or whether you have, you know, what your families are doing. Don't share information that is not relevant to the lessons that we are giving or the classes that we are giving on this platform. Please don't share any extra information, particularly not very clear contact details like phone numbers. Remember, the possibility of a scam is anywhere. I very much doubt that anyone in our beautiful classes is a scammer, but we must always be very, very, very careful online. Please be cautious and careful. So I don't really think anyone should be sharing. In fact, it's just, you must not share your phone numbers. You must not ask other people for their phone numbers. The other thing is, what could happen if you accept an invitation from someone who you don't know personally to join a WhatsApp group or any other online chat, for example, Facebook Messenger? We saw what happened to me on a WhatsApp. I got a WhatsApp message pretending to be my son, and I nearly gave that person a lot of money. All right. We saw what happened to poor Georgina on Facebook Messenger. Someone very nice called Jim, contacted her and asked to be her friend. And then she gave him a lot of money. And also she was then heartbroken. Now, you can be scammed in many, many ways on these groups. And I have already read scam stories from people in our class, from students, where someone joined a WhatsApp group. The person said they could provide a ticket for them to leave a country. They gave that person a lot of money and their bank details, and then that person deactivated the WhatsApp, right? We have seen that you can be, I've heard stories in our class and in general about that this information can be shared with criminals, with human traffickers, with blackmailers. Your photos could be stolen. Your information can be given to bad people. We know how bad these people can be. We must be very, very careful on all online platforms. And I really ask all of you, please do not share that information on our Zoom chat. But now it's going to be time for us to share scam stories and other stories, and next week to bring our beautiful folk stories so that we can have a lovely, uplifting lesson about that. I do thank you for listening to me, everyone, and let's have a discussion now. Thanks.